Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Interesting topic today. Let's learn some stuff. Autopsy doctors of Reddit. What is the strangest revelation you've had after someone's death that you've discovered after carrying out the procedure? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
Worked at an animal hospital. They did necropsies for zoos all the time. An alligator died, and they shipped it to the hospital, refrigerated, etc. to stop the decay. They took it out and put it up on the table. After doing all the paperwork, they started opening up the alligator. After the first cut, the alligator opened its eyes. Turned out it wasn't dead. The zoo vet mistook an illness for death, and the low temperature put it basically into a coma. I worked at a coroner's office for a while, and once we had a guy who we thought had died from an OD on meth. Well, we started the autopsy and I went to cut his lungs out and blueberry muffin mix started coming out of them. I stuck my finger in his mouth and it was full of blueberry muffin mix, and it was in the throat. Turns out, he got just high enough to pass out while eating the muffin mix, and he ended up choking to death. 6 months after my aunt's passing in a drunk driving incident, the coroner decided to ring up my mom and inform her that they had completed their report on her passing and deemed the likelihood of suicidal intentions, which may have factored into said incident. I initially didn't understand how coroners could decide or deduce such a thing until I remembered self-harm scars are a thing. My mom had only just gotten to the acceptance stage of grief and had put her firmly back to square one. She's fine now. So I'm not an autopsy doctor or anything of the sort. I did sit in on a murder trial. The mom drowned her infant in hot water. She claimed she was giving her newborn a bath in the sink with one of those sling-type inserts so babies can't go under. The doorbell rang. She answered and came back to her kid in scalding hot water. She claimed the kid had somehow turned on the hot water and burned himself while she was answering the door. But drowning was the ultimate rule of death. In the autopsy photos, the most disturbing thing I've ever seen in real life, you can clearly make out hand marks on that poor child's skin, on the biceps. You could see the finger outlines like you do if someone slaps you. I was 18 years old taking a criminal justice class. Just the ease of watching the trail of her and nonchalance killed most faith I had in humanity at the time. I know this doesn't quite fit the question, but for years I saw that boy's face in my sleep. What really kills me is, despite the evidence, she got off. I did the autopsy of both robber and his victim. The robber shot the victim in the back when he tried to escape in a motorcycle, and the robber was shot by the police in the exact same situation. What's interesting is that they both died by exactly the same lesion. Both of them had their fourth lumbar vertebrae shattered and their aorta, main artery of the body, sectioned at the same level. I thought of it like an extreme example of instant karma. During my internship rotation a couple of years back, a 40-year-old guy came in because he suddenly collapsed while drinking with friends. He came in unresponsive, mouth bleeding, and not breathing, so we had to intubate him. For some reason, the endotracheal tube, the stiff tube placed inside the trachea to help the patient breathe, won't go in. But we managed to suction copious amounts of blood clots. After CPR, still with unsuccessful intubation, so we had to bag him with a face mask, the patient was declared dead and diagnosed with a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. During the autopsy, they found out that the guy was apparently shot by a gun from the top of the head. The entry wound was obscured by his hair and was barely bleeding at all, and the bullet somehow went through the back of the guy's throat and made a hole behind the base of the tongue, which the endotracheal tube kept slipping into.
I mean, shot through the top of the head. I wonder what happened with an investigation into that. Crazy.
During medical school, I did a forensic pathology rotation during 4th year. Had an autopsy on a woman found in her burned-out home. She was on home oxygen, and the fire started in her bedroom. There were also liquor bottles around the home, so the thought was maybe she was drunk, smoking in bed, and caught herself on fire. She was badly charred up on the outside with no real distinguishing characteristics I could see. We opened her up, and when we got to her lungs, they were just the prettiest pink you could imagine, just like in the textbooks. This means she wasn't alive to breathe in the smoke and soot from the fire, so she had died, spoiler, was murdered, before it was set. Ultimately, I read in the paper some weeks later, It was the boyfriend trying to get insurance money. As a student in the medical field, I had the opportunity to visit a cadaver lab. I was very surprised to see how many people had died from choking. Out of the 12 or so cadavers in the lab that day, at least 7 or 8 were from choking. I went home and immediately looked up how to perform self-Heimlich. Training in the medical examiner's office, elderly woman found dead by herself in her home. There was nothing suspicious, so I was given the case. Took out all the organs, dissected everything, completely unremarkable. I cut through the larynx as the last step before I could clean up and finish the case, and boom, giant piece of chicken lodged in her windpipe. Died choking on dinner. I was an investigator for a state medical examiner for just over 2 years. Had a mom that had drank herself to death, according to the husband, after relapsing on Mother's Day weekend. I just felt like something was off. Sent her for an autopsy. Had a ruptured liver where dude had essentially beat her till she internally bled to death. Later, while out on bail, he stole a semi-truck, crashed it in a pond, got out, shooting at a deputy, and killed him. Saved the taxpayers a good chunk of money. Former homicide detective here. Suspicious death, 30-ish male, found alone by cleaning staff in the back row of a sparsely attended sci-fi movie. Strange scratching wounds around and in the mouth. Some pitochy in eyes and on cheeks, but no signs of strangulation. No obvious signs of chronic illness or disease. Presented as healthy, normal adult male. Found on his person was a wallet with normal contents and a single canceled movie ticket, indicating he went alone. Weird spy movie shit going on here. Autopsy. A large amount of popcorn compacted in his esophagus, like half a cup. Dude was apparently excited by the movie, stuffing popcorn in his mouth and choked. The scratch marks around or in his mouth were self-inflicted, trying to dig out popcorn. Verified via fingernail scrapings. His was only DNA present. Loud movie, he was in the back, no one saw or heard him choke. I've never eaten popcorn again.
Thanks for the story. New fear unlocked. But I'm still gonna eat popcorn. I'll be more careful.
Med student, almost graduated here. A couple years ago, I attended the pathological anatomy course, and during a class, the professor showed us some autopsies. Despite the tremendous smell of 4 to 5 consecutive autopsies, one of them was carried out on a homeless patient that died in the ER, probably due to heart failure. The body had massive ascites, filled fluid in the abdomen, so at first, he had to evacuate it. Imagine him cutting the abdomen, and the yellow, rancid liquid started to come out like a fountain. One of my colleagues fainted. Then the next step was to examine the abdominal organs. Imagine the face of every person in the room when it became clear that the patient had some form of inherited polycystic disease, and the liver and the kidneys were full of cysts. The liver weighed more than 10 kilograms, normal weight is 2 to 3 kilograms, and the kidneys almost 3 kilograms each, normally 150 grams each. The professor was really shocked at the beginning, but then he really enjoyed cutting through the cysts in order to get samples. They popped like air balls, spreading liquid all over the place. Second colleague fainted. The other ones were pretty standard, but I think I will remember forever this one, in particular that liver on the scale. I even took a picture, but I can't find it anymore. Not a doctor, but a whole-body scientific donation technician. I'm the person who dissects cadavers after they were donated. We very commonly would get young cases, normally overdoses. Had a mid-30s female, went to medical examiner prior to donation, but they only did an external evaluation. I went to check her genitals to see if I could palpate a uterus. Found a condom full of pills. Similar to most of the bodies, became a crime scene and we couldn't touch her. When we finally were able to continue, they asked us to photograph the pills to send to the examiner's office. They were mostly Advil and Zyrtec. Easily one of the weirdest things I've ever found. Working in the ER, young man comes in, one of 4 in a nasty auto accident. Speed plus inexperience equals car flipped, passengers ejected. One expired shortly after coming into the ER. I transported the body down to the morgue. First time I had felt a human being with all their bones broken. Felt like trying to lift sheets full of rolling bowling balls. Once in the morgue, I commented how unscathed he looked. He really did. Some dirt, the ET tube, not much else. Medical examiner offered I could view the autopsy if interested. I was interested. The first thing they noted were the x-rays of the fractures. Basically, all the major bones, including multiple rib fractures. When they opened the body, the organs were described as near liquefied. It wasn't until weeks later I got the whole story from the EMT who had been on scene. Seems the passenger had been half in and half out of the window while the car had been flipping. He was just days shy of 17. The driver was just days past 16. His parents had bought him a brand new car. He'd had it less than 72 hours. Driver lived, though with severe brain damage. Front and rear passengers died. Rear driver's side passenger survived with not too much permanent physical damage. I have friends whose kids are getting their driver's license. I never pass up a chance to drop that story on them. I've seen a lot of effed up things in my healthcare career. That is one of the grand total of 3 that make me tear up, and it's one from early on. Forensic pathologist here. 2 come to mind. I had just moved back to my home state where family lives. Get a case with a man with a distinctive last name in the family tree. I put a text out to my mom to see if we were related, but before she texted back, I pulled the sheet back and already knew. He looked like me. It was my great uncle. Get a case where it's a house fire death. On exam, he's got multiple textbook stab and incised wounds. I spend the next 30 minutes getting gaslighted quizzed by PD about, are you sure? Because they thought this was a straightforward house fire. Unfun fact, fire's not an uncommon way for people to try and conceal a homicide. My wife is a pathologist assistant, and during her schooling carried out an autopsy of a newborn that died minutes after birth. The mother was desperate for a child and had a history of multiple miscarriages at different terms. This was her first time making it full term, and all prenatal checkups revealed no problems. The delivery was difficult but successful, and baby was alive for a short time. Skip to autopsy. All signs point to baby being fully developed. Get to the abdominal cavity, and the liver is lacerated and hemorrhage everywhere. During the difficult delivery, the resident used too much force with the forceps to pull the baby out. The ruptured liver that caused the baby to bleed out internally. Wife was enthusiastic about autopsy up to this point. Now has no interest. Sheep farmer. I have to know how to do a necropsy for when something dies to know if it's something that could spread. Had a ewe fall over dead after losing a ton of weight and after treating her for everything under the sun. She would gasp for air and struggle to breathe, but antibiotics, steroids, and anti-inflammatory drugs didn't touch it. She finally passed away, and I cut her open to see what the hell happened, fully expecting to see her lungs riddled with shit. Her heart was 5 times the normal size and hard as a river stone. My guess is she'd had that issue her whole life, and it didn't kill her till she was 2.
That's a poor little sheep. I guess it's better to know than not know, right? How long do sheep usually live when they're part of a farm?
I was in charge of making copies of all the evidence to be used in the trial of Donald Harvey in 1989. He was known as the Angel of Death. One bit of evidence was an autopsy photo of an exhumed elderly woman. The examiner was holding, with tweezers, an 18-inch piece of cotton being pulled from her throat. Harvey liked to stuff cotton so far into the victim's throats that it could not be seen. I still can't shake the image from my brain. Masters in forensic pathology here. You'd be surprised to know the number of people that have life-threatening issues that never went diagnosed and that they didn't die from. Seen an older guy who died of pneumonia in hospital. On autopsy, the guy had both an enlarged heart and a couple of medium-sized aneurysms in the brain. Another guy in his 70s apparently came into the ER and had chest pain, then died shortly after. Dies of a heart attack, but also had cancer. In less natural circumstances, though, saw a guy who had been shot in the head a couple of times. 3 definite entries and blown out skull, but police only found 1 bullet. Couldn't find the other bullet in his head at all. Assumed the police missed it. Went on as normal with the autopsy until we got to the chest cavity. The other bullet was just chilling beside his lung. Turns out it entered the skull, hit the inside, ricocheted down his neck and into the chest. That was pretty wild.